Hey everyone, welcome back to Bagel TCG. Today we're going to be doing a tier list for the Post-Enigma meta. We just had Enigma and Zen pass the 1000 Living Legend point threshold, and they will officially be Living Legend this Friday, April 25th. So we're going to be doing a tier list to look at how the meta adjusts because of that. We still have 3 or 4 weeks of Pro Quest left to go, and so this meta will be relevant for qualifying for Singapore, and will probably still bleed into the High Seas meta as well. Although, of course, I'll do a tier list update once we know a lot more about the High Seas heroes to see how they'll impact the meta. But let's get into it here. The biggest thing, of course, is Enigma hitting Living Legend. Zen is a little significant, but I'm not going to talk about it too much. He was not a huge meta contender, to be honest. After all of his bans and cards taken away from him, he's been kind of moderate power level since then. But Enigma was kind of the driving force in the meta, her and Aurora together, especially in the London meta we just had. Aurora was, the premier aggro deck. You needed to have some way to deal with Aurora, and then you needed a way to deal with Enigma, which was a lot harder to do. She had just so much power with her permanents. We saw her, of course, win both the Pro Tour and the Calling, so proving Enigma is just that good, and that's also why she hit Living Legend so fast. Enigma was just really strong, and especially because of how her permanents worked, she was basically a damage check. Like if you didn't deal enough damage per turn, you would not be able to clear all of her auras, and then she would just build more, right? And so you would just slowly get snowballed by more and more and more auras if you didn't have a sufficient amount of damage per turn. And then even if you eventually hit the damage per turn to clear all her auras, she could just let you take all of them and then reset the board with a new 5 card hand. So she was just really, really strong. Because she's gone now, a lot of decks that are lower on damage, thinking like Guardians, Assassins, these kind of defensive decks, maybe Warriors, are going to be much, much better now, right? Because they lost by far their worst matchup and definitely the deck that was holding them back because they just didn't have enough damage to clear these things. But maybe they had a different thing that was strong. They had some disruption, something like that. But really, the only thing that mattered into Enigma was how much damage you could deal. Um, and so now, without that, these lower damage decks are going to have a lot more room to shine. These setup decks, stuff like that. So let's get into it. I'm only going to put one deck in S tier for now, and that is Aurora. She was seen as the best deck, or one of the best decks. I think Enigma was the best deck leading into London. Actually, my predictions were okay. If you saw the last tier list, I said Enigma would win PT, and then I said Florian would win Calling because I was in Florian on Calling, but it ended up being Enigma. I don't think that was like a super hard prediction, to be honest. I think a lot of people would have guessed Enigma won, but it's nice to see my prediction come true. Um, but I do, we saw Aurora did have the highest play rate in the events, and I do think she was a decent pick still to win either event. And I don't think that's changed. She's still the premier aggro deck. She still has some of the best aggressive numbers, if not the best aggressive numbers in the format. And she even has tools like the Flicker Wisp combo to help her deal with the slower decks. She can play kind of utility blues like Poison the Well against Counter Blessing decks, and I think she still has a lot of room for adaptation and innovation. She can just play a pretty wide card pool, so I think Aurora is the only S tier deck at the moment. Not that she doesn't have answers. I think there are multiple decks that can answer her and maybe be favored into her, but I don't think anything is just going to absolutely crush her. I think she's going to have a chance into the most of the field, and always be a pretty solid pick. So if you just want to pick up a good aggro deck that'll give you a good chance, I would say go Aurora. Now, if you want to not play an aggro deck, that's where A tier comes in. The first hero I'm going to put in A tier is Florian. Florian was held back severely by Enigma. It was definitely his worst matchup. And now Enigma's gone, and it kind of opens the floodgates for Florian. He can do some really crazy things, especially the fact that he has two different play styles. You can either play him mid range with Reaping Blade and just play this kind of 1-2 card hand game, just swinging back and forth, a little Guardian style. Or you can play the Rune Chant stack OTK version with Scepter, where you're just trying to build, 40, 50 Rune Chants and just kill the opponent like that. So, two different styles, both I think are equally viable. I think maybe the OTK version with Rune Chants is a little better right now, but I think it's pretty close, and I could even be wrong on that. But what that means is when you play against a Florian, unless you already know what that player personally is on, you kind of have to guess what they're playing. And you have to board pretty differently for those two things, right? Like, for example, D reacts to almost nothing into the rune chant stacking version. Like maybe they'll swing, a felling or a plow under once or twice, but there's even a chance they don't swing any attacks except the one ninth play they swing at the end. And in that case, your D-Reacts are all dead. But against the mid-range version where they're attacking every turn, the D-Reacts are pretty good and you probably want them. So just stuff like that can make it really different depending on which flooring you're playing against, so it makes it really hard to sideboard against them. Also, he just has such insane numbers. I think his Aurora matchup is serviceable. I don't think it's like super Florian favored, but it's also, I would say, not super Aurora favored. And then I think he's pretty good into a lot of the rest of the field. He's favored into Assassin. He's favored into Warrior. He's favored into Guardians. He's kind of favored into almost everything. His weakness is still Illusionist. I still think he's maybe a bit weak into Prism, and I think maybe into Verdance as well. But overall, he has a really good matchup spread across the field, outside of like Illusionists and Wizards, which are kind of always the weakness for slower decks. Guardians are also going to lose to Prism and the two Wizards. So that's just still the weakness of the meta, but Enigma was by far the most played of those combination of Illusionist and Wizard, and now that she's gone, these decks open up a lot. So on that note, I'm also going to throw Yarl in here. You can see the elemental heroes are back in force. We've got Tales of Aria Part 2 here, doing quite good. It actually is kind of funny how it's like Briar, Lexi, and Oldham feeling almost. But anyways, Yarl I think is much, much stronger now that Enigma is gone. That matchup was almost 0% win rate for Yarl. I mean, maybe it was a 0% win rate for Yarl. It's basically unwinnable. But he's quite good into the rest of the field. You can play either the... He also kind of has two different styles you can pick from. You can play the Counter Blessings Rampart version, which is a lot more fatigue focused, and might have more of the Earth package with Fellings and Plow Unders. Or you can play the ice heavy version with Ice Quakes and Frost Fangs and Pummels. That is a lot more like aggressive disruption, but has a massive fridge with Stalagmite to back it up. So it kind of is doing the disruptive assassin thing, but with the Guardian tool set and equipment set to back it up. So two different playstyles for Yarl. Once again, I'm not sure which is best. I would lean towards the Rampart Counter Blessings Fatigue version being better. But once again, I haven't really done enough testing to tell you for sure which one's better. I think both are quite strong. The fact that he can control equipment so easily gives him a huge edge into a lot of the field. A lot of heroes depend heavily on one or two pieces of equipment, and he can just delete them, which makes him really flexible and have a huge advantage over the other Guardian heroes who can't just delete a problem equipment as easily as he can. What else is an A tier? I think Slippy is an A tier. He kind of started to prove himself a little bit at London. We saw a decent showing from him. That was really the first time I think Slippy showed up in any meaningful way at an event. We've seen him, I think, maybe win a Battle Harden or do okay here and there. But people kind of thought of him as a meme deck, or I think at least most of the community did. But he really showed in London how strong he can be. And I think he is the best assassin. His hero ability is just so strong. Go again on stealth every turn. Just leaves so little information for the opponent. If you just start with a stealth attack and you're holding 3 cards in hand and maybe even an arsenal, they have no idea if those are more go again cards, if they are a big attack like Command and Conquer, if they are attack reactions. I mean, he hides information even better than any other assassin has. Plus, has this just natural go again where even if you're not hiding information and your opponent just always disrespects you, you're still just getting such good numbers. You have so many like on hit pseudo draw effects like Art of Desire, Body, Infiltrate, cards like that that just, yeah, really, really strong. And I think he's probably, if you want to play Assassin, the Assassin I would pick up right now. Quite good. I think that's all I'm going to stick in A tier. I think the meta is kind of focused a lot. It already focused a lot because of how much testing went into London. And I think it's only kind of small-ish meta shifts after Enigma, even though she had a big impact. And I think she's what bumps Florian and Yarl to being top contenders. I think the meta is still pretty focused because of how focused Aurora makes the meta, and now I think Florian as well. I think you kind of need good matchups into these heroes to be a relevant hero. What am I going to put in B tier? I think New, I would put in B tier. She might deserve to be an A tier, to be honest, but I'm just going to put her in B tier for now. I think uh, her hero ability is not as relevant at the moment. I think most people are not really playing blues that your hero ability is going to be useful for. And I don't think she can, out fatigue the other fatigue decks. I think she's going to get Rune Chant stacked by Florian, and I think she's going to get her mask blown up by Jarl and then fatigued that way. So it seems a little hard for her to beat the other slow decks. And then I think her Aurora matchup is fine. I'm not really sure about her Slippy matchup, but I think it might. I honestly don't know. I would guess maybe it's a slightly new favorite, but I've never played that one. But I think she's in a decent spot. Uh, but I just don't think she's quite as good as Slippy in the assassin role, who just has like most of the time a strictly better hero power, where in a lot of the matchups, New has no hero ability at all. Of course, she has other advantages. The Mystic card pool is really good. She gets really good equipment from it, and she gets some really powerful cards. But even cards like Siren's Call are not super strong right now. You know, if you're playing Runechant Florian or Aurora or Slippy, all of them are on like 6 or 9 blues, and that's going to be pretty hard. The only matchup in these top decks that Siren's Call even does anything into is Yarl. Um, so I just don't see her super well positioned at the moment. I'm going to put another Guardian in here now. I think Victor is in a pretty good spot. I don't think he's in as good of a spot as Jarl, but I think he probably has a better Aurora matchup. He can do some really good things, right? Like Clash is just super strong, and you can get some insane value off your cards. His worst matchup was, of course, Enigma, so that brings him up a lot already. And I think he does pretty decent into the Assassins. He's going to win most of those clashes. He's going to win almost all of his clashes against Aurora. And I think when you're winning clashes, you're usually, not always, but usually winning the game on Victor. Of course, the exception to that was Enigma, where even if you won your clashes, you could barely clash, and also their board would still run you over. But I think in these other matchups, he will do fine. Prism maybe actually deserves to be A tier. I was about to put her in B tier, but she did represent really well at London. Yeah, I'll put her in A tier just for her, just based on like results oriented thinking here. I mean, she did really well. I think she put 3 people into top 8 at London. And so I think, she's also filling Enigma's shoes a little bit now as the only illusionist in the format. So I think she deserves to be an A tier because if people start disrespecting illusionists a lot, taking out a lot of their aggressive pieces, she can do her, aura stacking thing. She still, I think, bodies the slower decks like Guardians, and Florian as well, most likely. So I think, of course, while she's a lot weaker than Enigma, I would say. I mean, she has 8 less life, so she's easier to run down a lot of the times. She does other good things too, right? Like her Herald can make her able to beat Aurora a bit better. So, yeah, I'll put Prism in A tier. I have a little bit of a bias against her just because my Guardian brain doesn't like the 32 life, but I think she deserves to be an A tier, just at least based on her results oriented performance at London. Back to B tier. Um, I'm gonna put Aelia here. She's had a pretty bad showing lately, but I think Dreadbore Aelia and like anti-control Aelia, so maybe even Sandscour. I don't want to say that. I'll say at least Dreadbore Aelia could have a really good showing into these more defensive decks. Maybe Riptide for that reason as well, but I'm not as confident on Riptide in general. But Dreadbore is looking really good in the meta, so you can play Dreadbore into these, like 15, 18 defense reaction decks, and then you can play Death Dealer into the aggro decks. And I think that would put her in a decent spot. So I think her power level is still there. She's still a Codex deck, and that'll get her into B tier. I'll put Fang next in B tier. He just has good numbers. I think he's favored into the assassins, which are pretty common. I think he might lose to the slower decks, but I think he can do okay into the aggressive decks. And I think he might even do fine. I think he might even be favored into Yarl sometimes. He just has really, really good consistent numbers. I think his yeah, funny enough, he has consistent numbers, but the consistency of getting to those numbers is what's holding him back. He just has a little bit of trouble with his consistency before he's at 3 fealty. Sometimes you draw all red hands that are clunky. Sometimes you just don't draw the fealty generators and you don't get there. Um, and that's the consistency issue. Once you're online, you're just so powerful. So I'll put him in B tier just for that power. I'm gonna put Verdance in B tier as well. Um, Once again, kind of filling Enigma's shoes. I know obviously she's very different. She's not an illusionist or setting up the board in the same way, but she does punish the slower decks with the rampant growth combo. It's pretty consistent. I saw some Verdances doing pretty well in London. So I think she deserves to be here. Earth is really strong. As you can see, I put the other two Earth heroes in A tier. So already having the Earth package, Felling is just a pretty broken card. Barkskin is a really good card. So I think she gets to be there just for being an Earth hero and having that really strong package. And then I'll put Vincent in B as well. Runeblade is still really good. You can see the other Runeblades. I guess we have a Runeblade in each tier here. Also, just to be clear, I'm not ordering it really within the tier. I'm just kind of throwing them in there, so don't worry too much about the ranking within the tier itself. But Vincent's pretty good. She has a pretty good Aurora matchup, so I think that is a big push for Vincent being higher up here. But I also think she can do some cool banish stacking against the slower decks. It takes a lot of practice. I think Vincent is a much more skill expressive hero. Uh, but if you can stack that banish zone, get 3 attacks wide out of rune gating in a turn, you can push 30 damage turns against these slower decks. And if you can do that twice, you'll usually win the game. So she has tools. It's just another deck with a little bit of consistency issues. I think kind of for the same reason Fang and Aelia are here. They have the power, but they're missing a little bit of consistency. Just 1 or 2 pieces are missing from putting them into an A tier deck where their power really kind of belongs. Now, I think the rest of the meta is just C or D tier, so I'm not going to worry about it too much because I think usually only the top tiers are worth paying a lot of attention to. Dex, I'm going to shout out. Dash.io is still pretty good. She just takes a lot of practice and skill. I think she's even harder than Vincent. So unless you want to put hundreds of reps in, I wouldn't recommend picking her up. But she's a really cool hero, and I think can have favored matchups if you really practice them all quite well. Syndra and Syndra and Fi are both pretty decent Draconic heroes still. They're just not quite at the power level they need to be. You just see their stats, and I think Syndra converted 0 out of 40 people or something like that to day 2 at the calling. I mean, one of the worst stats I've ever seen in Flesh and Blood history. So they're just missing a little bit of the power level, obviously. Ira as well. The ninjas are just a little weaker than they should be right now. Also, Katsu. Yeah, the ninjas are not quite there. If you want to play ninja, just play the lightning ninja here. Warriors, I think Kasai and Dorinthia are both solid. Bolton probably is going to be in D tier, but the Warriors are fine. Yeah, not Olympia either. Kasai and Dorinthia are fine. Nothing super spectacular. I'll give Max the benefit of the doubt and put him in C tier because he just got an armory deck, but he might deserve to be in D tier still. It doesn't seem like it's giving him a ton of support. I'll put the Guardians here. I mean, you could just play them as Rampart counter blessings and they'd probably still beat a lot of stuff, but just play Yarl if you're going to do that. I'll put Acilio in C. I think he can do some cool stuff. KO and Levia also deserve to be there. I'll put Kano in there as well. Maybe he should be in B tier, to be honest, but I just love to disrespect Kano. I'll put Mario in C tier as well. Assassin's just fine, except for Huntsman. But Assassin's fine, but if you're going to play Assassin, just play Slippy. Or if you want a different flavor, play New, but probably don't play Mario, just play Slippy. I'll also put Azuri in D tier. Once again, just not really worth playing her over the other Assassins. Dash, maybe you could play the pistol setup style. I don't see that beating some of these decks like Prism or Florian or Aurora, but I guess you could try it and it could beat some stuff. And then Reinar and Teklo, I think, are still in D. So yeah, I mean, the meta has so many heroes, like 30 something heroes right now, so there's going to be pretty big C and D tiers until the meta. I don't think it'll ever get smaller, to be honest. So most of the time, these tier lists going forward are going to be focusing on the top 3 tiers, which I'm going to try to keep more focused. And this is how I see the meta right now. After Enigma and Zen have left the format, Aurora, the top dog for sure, going to see the most play. You need to have some answer to Aurora, whether that's playing Aurora yourself or having a decent sideboard into her. You need some plan for Aurora. And then I would say take a look at your matchups into Assassin in general. They all play somewhat similar, but if you want a baseline, just look at your Slippy matchup. Have some game plan into Prism. I think her play rate will go up and up after getting 3 people into the top 8 of London. So you need some a Prism plan, and then you need some plan into Rune Chant stacking Florian in these like Counter Blessing slow Yarl decks. You're going to be facing a lot of disruption nowadays with how disruptive Slippy is, Yarl, and the mid-range Florian. All 3 can be pretty disruptive decks. So I think you need a game plan into all 3 of them, and then also a game plan if they're trying to do a different strategy like Rune Chant stack or Counter Blessings, which don't disrupt but do try to beat you on different axes like Fatigue or Rune Chant stacking. That's how I see the meta right now. Let me know what you think in the comments. Really excited to see how this plays out over the next few weeks. As a Guardian and Florian player, I brought Florian to the calling and have been playing Yarl a bunch before that. I'm obviously super happy to see Enigma leave the format, but we will see how degenerate it makes the format with that deck leaving. Maybe now the Florian and Counter Blessing is just too degenerate. I'm not really sure. But thanks so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you next time.